Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from Alex Merced Coder, and this is another video in our React Parcel React series. So let me actually get my dev server running again. So I need to open up the folder for this project too. Open in terminal. And let's get that going. npm run dev. Okay, so now what's going to happen here as we run dev? Well, that's just running dev, but what we're going to do in this video is show you how to do like Ajax calls. So if you wanted to do, for a particular component, you wanted to pull in data from, another source, an API, how would you do it? Okay. Now, in a class component, you would use Lifecycle functions. So it'd be like, on component mount, and there's all these different functions for that you would define in the class. For a function component, you have to use a hook, kind of like we use useState to simulate state. To simulate lifecycle, I'm going to delete this title too. Oh, there it goes. It's starting. There it is. Okay, I'm going to get rid of title 2 here. I'm going to just kind of change this back to what it was before. Get rid of this. Make this title again. So that way it's triggering off our state. Okay, maybe just change these functions back to what it was originally back in the previous video. So this is just going to be boop, 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 boop. And that's going to be title or set title. One. Then I'll just copy that. That one we'll just say 2. Keep it simple. Okay. Now, to use lifecycle, okay, what you're going to do is you don't have to actually save any variable, so it's just react.useEffect. Okay. And then this function, you pass a callback. So you pass this a function. Okay. Okay. And then in this function, what we're going to do is you do whatever you want to happen when the component mounts. So whatever you want to happen when the component starts, you'll put in this function. And then as a second argument is going to be an array. Now this array is going to track certain variables. And what you're saying is that when that variable changes, rerun this function. Okay, I only want this function right now to really happen once, so I'm going to keep an empty array there. And basically this function will just do whatever it does to get-go. And at the end, I can return another function. And if I return this other function, it'll do it when the component goes away. I generally don't need to do that, so I'm not going to do that. Okay, so we're just going to do here is just say console.log. This happens once. So even though the component will re-render every time the state changes, this only happens once. This only happens the first time the component is actually mounted to the screen. That's the beauty of useEffect. Because you don't want making it an API call every single time your component changes state. That would just be really inefficient. So the useEffect allows you to do something. So again, whatever's in this function happens the first time the component mounts, and will happen again whenever any of the variables in this array change. And then if you want something to happen when the component goes away, then you would just return another callback. Okay, so I'm going to save that. We're going to go over here. I'm going to show the inspector. So technically that console log should have already happened. See, this happens once. It happens when the component gets first mounted. But now if I click here, see, it changed the state. The component technically re-rendered, but even though it re-rendered, it doesn't run that function again. And that's the beauty of this, because you don't necessarily want to be doing the same API call over and over again. You'll create like an infinite loop. Because what's going to happen is that when we make the API call, we're going to update our state, and if our API call then was part of the general body of the function, it would then rerun again when the component re-renders, change the state again, and you just end up with this infinite loop of Ajax calls. So now let's go to JSON placeholder so that we can get some just fake API data. Doo-ba-doo-ba-doo-ba-doo-boo. Okay, we essentially will do this. Let's literally copy this code. Okay, here you just use a standard fetch. Okay. Okay, and then basically we'll pass, and then we get this. So again, we're fetching from this URL. We're saying, hey, we want to get something from over here. And then we are taking that response and turning it to JSON after that promise is fulfilled. And when that promise is fulfilled, we will then take that JSON and do whatever that JSON data and do whatever we want with it. So I need to create a piece of state to store that data. So I'm going to call here const, and we'll just call this data. And then we'll have a function called setData to change the data if we need to. And that's going to equal react.useState. So you can create multiple pieces of state. And I'm just going to create an empty object here for now. Okay. Save. Okay. And then I'm going to console.log data. So that you can see that data changes. And then at the here, on the second dot then, what we're going to do is we're going to use set data, and we're going to set the data to JSON. So we did a fetch, we got back the response, we took the response, parsed it into a JSON string, and then we're taking that set data function and setting the data to equal what we got back from the API. This only happens once because it's in the useEffect thing, and again, it won't repeat itself because there's no dependencies that trigger a repeat. Cool. Okay, so let's go back to here. Let's take a look at our console log. So see, initially, when the component first mounted, we only saw the empty object because data was in an empty object. But when it re-rendered after state was updated, now it was this. Okay, so now we see what's inside of it. Now here's the problem. I would like to actually put this stuff. Now here I'll show you what's the problem first. Okay, so let's actually use some of that. So all that's going to be in data. So it's going to be data.body, data.id, data.title. So we're going to say here, we'll create another h2 where we're going to put data.title. Okay, and that's actually going to be lowercase data. And again, the first go around, the data doesn't exist. So let's watch what happens. The data doesn't exist. Will it error? Yep, see, it doesn't exist. Now it arrives and it re-updates. Okay, cool. And that's fine if the data, that data that I'm referring to is like one layer deep. But let's see, do we have anything like 3 layers deep? No, not in this particular piece of data. But let's say you had another one of these properties was an object, and then you tried to put that on here. It's going to error out. So in situations like this, maybe I don't want this particular h2 to render, or I don't want it to render data.title until it's loaded, until it's done. So what I can do is something like this. I can do data.title, then I'll do question mark. So if it doesn't exist yet, what it'll do is it'll render loading. And when oh no, that's if it is there, then I want data.title. That's the first one if it's true. Data.title. But if it's not there, then we want it to say loading. Okay, so that way it says loading until the data is actually available. So let's refresh. It should say loading for a second. And then when the data arrives. Okay, and that way I'm not trying to access a property that doesn't exist. So what happens when you're pulling in a lot of API data, you'll find that you're going to be using a lot of ternary operators because you're going to have a lot of data that's not going to exist right away because the data doesn't exist till it exists, till the Ajax calls are completed. But your component's going to render right away and try to pull that data. And it'll error out if you don't put in these checks. Okay, so then you'll just put like, you could just do like this where it just says loading until the data is available. Okay, because again, the component's re-rendering. It's rerunning through this code every time that state changes. Cool, so that's Lifecycle. That's how you would pull data from an API. Okay, so you do it in this useEffect hook. So you would just basically create this function and just put it in there. And then you would just, save it in a piece of state, have a piece of state created for it, and put it in your JSX. Easy peasy. We'll see you guys in one more video where we'll talk about forms, and then I think we will be, this is a good sort of primer for you to start playing around and trying to make projects of your own.